Thank you guys so much for your patience. It's just such a finicky thing to try and get
Of course.
sorted out.
It's no problem. I wouldn't know how to do it, so.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'm just going to share the link.
If there's anything we can do, let us know.
Oh, there seems to be something now.
Is there something working now?
Thank you guys so much for your patience. It's just such a finicky thing to try and get.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it is.
It's live.
It's live now.
Oh, on that same link?
No, there's a new link.
New link,
That's
yeah.
working. The old link it's not.
What is this?
Where are people finding the link?
Just on the YouTube.
If you have to
On
send it,
Zoom. YouTube.
Yeah, Khidr Collective, yeah, and then it comes
if you go
up.
to their homepage, like their main landing page, whatever, you can see the.
Okay, so we should
Okay,
direct people
that's
towards
We're
our
live.
page rather than the old one.
The old link is not.
We'll just let people know.
Wow, it's such a weird lag.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Don't watch it. Don't watch it.
I was really confused when I went onto it.
Do you want me to send you the link, Nishat?
Got it. So
Okay, cool.
I'm just putting it on the old chat because we've got about 13 people on there. I'm saying please join and we will start in a few minutes.
Warda, when people, the Eventbrite thing, when they did that, they got what link did they get?
So we just told them that we'll be sending a link through.
Okay.
So what I've told the rest of the team is Nishat's obviously going to put it in the old chat, but then through the Eventbrite, somebody else will send it through to any of the other attendees.
I'm updating the Eventbrite as we speak. So
Okay, cool.
if anyone is joining later. And we'll let a few people migrate over to this new video. I feel like someone out there under the age of 25 is laughing at us.
I think this conversation is also live, right?
They'll be watching it back and laughing at us. Okay.
Incredible job. Yeah.
Someone under 25 is watching something for more than 20 minutes.
Good point. Good point.
All right, so the family has reported that they're looking at it now. So we have that.
Sorry if you've got any plans after this.
Nothing is open.
What we can do, as I'm sure people will see my comment on the old live, we can begin just so that we've gone about 20 minutes now. So without further ado, hello and welcome to Writing Water. This is our first event celebrating the launch of issue 4 of the Khidr Collective zine, which is otherwise known as the Water Issue. And in this panel will be our non-fiction editor Warga will be speaking with some of the very talented writers who featured in the Water Issue. I will be hearing from writer Amira Elwakil, photojournalist Kaamil Ahmed, poet Hibaq Osman, and songwriter and researcher Dina Amro. And they'll be reflecting on how the written word in all of its forms helps to create new perspectives on the theme of water precarity, politics, and personal identity. If you are joining us via YouTube today, please feel free to leave comments and questions in the chat, and we'll hopefully have some time at the end to go through those. And you can also tweet us at Khidr Collective with the hashtag #WritingWater. So without wasting any more time, I will now hand over to Warda and our wonderful speakers to kick off the discussion.
Hi everybody, my name is Warda and I am an editor at the Khidr Collective, and I'm so excited to have some of our amazing contributors here to chat with us. So I guess one of the first questions that I wanted to ask everybody sort of across the board was more about, you know, what is your journey with writing been like, and kind of ask you to introduce your careers up till now, just like briefly. So we can start with Amira.
Thank you, Wertha and Nishat. So my writing journey, I'm still on it. I guess I've always been writing. When I was younger, I wrote a lot more poetry, short stories, and now it's more non-fiction, but incorporating elements from what I used to do, as like my younger self used to do. A lot of my writing now is like very kind of personal essays. A lot of them tend to be around like mental ill health. And I'm interested in the intersection between the political and the personal. So I'm not sure if I identify as a writer, but I'm really humbled that you think I am. In terms of work, I'm a teacher. I teach English with migrant communities in London, using an approach that's rooted in radical education. And I organize on issues relating to migrant justice, including housing and healthcare inequalities.
Okay, thank you. I would beg to differ that, you know, you're saying you don't consider yourself a writer. I mean, your piece was absolutely amazing, and I've said this many times. Okay, now it's recorded. But yeah, I'll say that again just for the record. Yeah, I think your piece is absolutely amazing. Hibaq, yeah, so if you could introduce yourself and your journey to writing.
Yep. So I nearly always introduce myself as a poet rather than a writer, just because I don't really have much experience in other forms yet, but it is something I sort of do in the background. I have been, so cliche to say, but writing for as long as I can remember. Pretty much as soon as I could sort of write stuff, I was writing poetry from a very young age. And then I, around 16, did sort of gigs, open mic nights, things of that nature. Was sort of boosted by these people that I'd met who, you know, through these events were kind of like, no, you should really actually give it a go. And yeah, so I just kept on doing that for a few years while doing uni. And then in 2015, I released my first pamphlet with Outspoken Press called A Silence You Can Carry. And yeah, I just sort of kept doing that for a bit. Events similar, performing my poetry or reading my poetry. I started moving a bit away from what would be considered spoken word and more into what people may call page poetry, though I don't really like to differentiate the two too much, but started doing more of that, and released some online pamphlets. So I sort of released my own PDFs of things that I didn't quite know what to do with and realized there might not have been a space for in a sort of published way, and so just released them online for people to read and have a look at. And then in last October, well, prior to that, I was asked to release a collection under Jacaranda Press, who are doing 20 Black British writers in 2020. So they published, I think, 10 novelists, 10 non-fiction, and then 10 novelists, 5 poetry, 5 non-fiction. And I was really honored to be a part of that. And that came out last year in October. So my second book, Where the Memory Was, came out in October last year. And that's really it. I don't know how else to explain that. I've just been chilling since, sort of looking now towards working with other forms, film mainly, and music work and things of that nature. So yeah, that's about it.
Okay, speaking of music, Dina.
Hey guys, my passport name is Dina. My stage name is Bint Mbarih, or Bint for, yeah, maybe she can't pronounce Mbarih as easily, but Bint is fine. So basically, I was looking for a way to combine my interest in resource sovereignty in Palestine, and the only way that I could talk about it in such a way that people would listen, aka not academic. So the way that I found that I could effectively do that was by researching like mythical or historical or traditional rain summoning in Palestine, and collating what I research and then singing it myself. So if no one's listening to the aunties that I'm researching from, let me go to every single gallery who will listen to me and like sing it out loud as loud as I can. It started kind of with, I want to think of rain research, and I want to think of like rain as a means of kind of reclaiming some sovereignty over water resources in Palestine. And then that ended up being kind of like, okay, but this is, as a tradition, has been so empowering for people in the past when rain is scarce or when, you know, water is scarce. So to me, that meant that, yeah, as a tradition, it could be a very powerful tool to rethink like how we could communally ask for water without asking an oppressor or without asking an occupying force or without asking, kind of constantly reifying the idea that there's always like a force that's stronger than our occupier. Maybe that's us when we're united. So that's kind of been the underpinning of why I started talking and singing and writing about rain songs. So I did a lot of that research in Palestine, and I studied anthropology of music. And that was kind of just an excuse to write and do more of this. So I did that, and then I just had the opportunity to perform this performance that is a group of collated and improvised rain songs from Palestine. And I guess that's at that moment exactly. Khidr was Khidr Collective was asking kind of who would like to write about water in a spiritual way, or who would like to write about water. So I was like, wow, okay, that makes sense to me. So I did that, and then kind of now on a trajectory to writing a little bit less about like material water and more about like time, because of various reasons. Maybe it's better to come up later on in the conversation. But yeah, that's me. I like rain and water.
Amazing. And Kaamil?
Yeah, I guess I see myself as a reporter mainly. So it's I spend my time like, it's more about like listening to people and talking to people, and then writing is like the main form, like the main output of that. It's just, I also do photography and audio and sometimes video, but even those all require writing, like during to put them together. But yeah, it's been like, I don't know, since I was at university or before. I used to also do poetry, so maybe that informed it a bit. Some people say they can tell, but so I used to be involved in like some poetry groups in London like more than 10 years ago. And then yeah, I just have been working towards journalism for a long time, so it's pretty straightforward. It's like my journey is just, it's my work. Like it's listen to people, try and find out what's going on in their lives, and then put it into, just present it and as writing. It's kind of like a straightforward process that I do all the time. So it's quite a straightforward journey.
No, that's amazing. Thank you guys for answering that. For just those who aren't that well acquainted with the zine and haven't really read your pieces, if you could just briefly give everybody maybe like a byline or a line about sort of what your piece is about, just so that, you know, we have some context grounding the rest of the discussion. So we'll start in the same order again. Amira, you go first.
Yeah, so I guess so my pieces are an essay that so it's the title is Breached Waves. I wrote this a couple of years ago on New Year's Day on a beach in Brighton. I don't live in Brighton, but I needed to see a horizon, so I left London to Brighton. But it's also a reflection on water and borders, because Brighton's on the Channel. I don't want to call it the English Channel, because actually the whole piece is kind of looking at the absurdity of adding a border to a body of water. I mean, adding a border anywhere is absurd, but also including a body of water. So I guess the piece is about looking at the English in the English Channel, and the violence of that border.
Okay, thank you. And Hibaq?
So my piece is titled Beyond the Waters, and it was a poem. It is mainly sort of about our spiritual connection with water, being born sort of covered in some sort of watery fluid, being journeying, through the world, and then the stories of people that we've lost through these journeys, and often, a bit like what Amira was just saying, like the violence of these borders on water or borders in general, and how oftentimes we're mourning people that we don't actually even know we've lost until it's a bit too late, or we're mourning them, just sending them off on the journey. And I talk a little bit about how we then use water to, well in Islam, like the idea of sadaqah jariyah, like we then build wells or do charity work in the name of those that have passed, and how even that is sort of quite often, at least for me in my experience, wells and things of that nature, and how we actually can't build enough wells to keep up with the loss, especially in the last year or so. I'd say we've had a lot of conversations about that. So it was kind of from thinking about that and the idea of loss and the idea of return. Again, when we bury our dead, we wash them and things like that. So it's sort of about connectivity within water, within sort of the spirituality of being connected by water, and also how it distances us to begin with. I'd say that'd be it.
Amazing. Dina, I know that you talked a bit about in length about sort of, peace, but is there anything else that you wanted to add about the specific contribution that you made to the zine?
I guess, so the piece is just a reflection on this research that I just mentioned, but at the same time, a big part of the research is about St. George, as he's called here, or Khidr, who is like quite central in a lot of the songs. Almost across most villages that I went to, people were asking specifically this very powerful, very benevolent saint to bestow the water upon them because of his so I guess what I noticed a lot during that, to throw back to the issue of time, is that the people that I spoke to spoke of this man as if he was a neighbor, or as if he was like, an old friend. Or so I guess for me, that was like bridging a humongous time gap just by using a story, right? And bridging this link between what is supposed to be really mythical and supposed to be really unrelated with the material world, and then making it bringing it really with the story and with the storytelling into the current world. So this was at the same time that the first person who introduced me to the story, who told me about him, had passed away like within the 2 months of my writing this piece. So it was kind of, if there was one way to emulate what the myth of water and the archetype of water would bring to storytelling, it would be this time passage, this like flowing across time barriers as if they don't exist, right? So for me, it felt even more necessary to be writing the piece at that time, when I could like make sure to break the time barrier that was preventing the water songs from being in the present and in the future. Does that make any sense? Am I okay?
Powerful way of putting it.
That's just kind of what I that's what I wrote about.
Amazing. Okay, and Kaamil.
Yeah, so I've been like reporting in Bangladesh since 2014, and late 2014, so it's like 6-7 years. And just rivers are something that come up like all the time, like especially once you get into rural areas, they're everywhere. Water is like such an issue, and it was like part of the culture, this idea of 700 rivers in a small country. And so it's just something I've naturally taken photos of and kind of spoken to people about. And so the piece was just kind of bringing that together. Like some of those photos are quite old. They're like from like 2015 or like before that. Some of them are newer. They're from Dhaka. They're from villages. So it was just kind of a little kind of photo essay bringing together kind of just how people live on the water and why, but also like what's been lost because those rivers are dying. And like one of the things, so I did another story about it somewhere else like a year ago, and so some of these photos were kind of part of that project, but because like Bangladesh passed a law to that like contributing to killing rivers can be like legally made equivalent to like punish like killing a person. And so that was one of the things that kind of pushed me. It was an interesting ruling and like pushed me towards like looking at, well, what's first of all like what's happening and what's happened to the people who have been losing their like livelihoods to the rivers that are dying. Yeah.
Amazing. I think sort of just kind of going off of that, this like the first section, the first thing that came to my mind when I was looking across all of your pieces was that you use writing to talk about very difficult subjects. So I've got a few questions for like all of you that are specifically related to the topic of difficulty. So for Kaamil, like I guess like just going off of what you said, you captured the dilemma between the pull of development and the cost of environmental damage, and you've conceptualized costs in ways that go beyond just, like a surface level explanation of there is global warming. So, from your experience and what you've seen, what can you tell us about the environmental and the societal cost of development across the areas that you visited?
Yeah, in Bangladesh, it's like pretty obvious. Like it's this country that like talks about massive economic growth every year. Like even this year with COVID, it's like it didn't shrink. The economy carried on growing like 4% or something, right? And if you're ever in Dhaka, like which I hate that city, it's like constantly growing and higher and like closer together. And there's like, so in Bangladesh, you've got like the garment industry growing. You've got all the Dhaka in 1971 was like bungalows. It was like all like very low level. I think it was maybe 300,000 people or less. I can't remember. It was a very small city. It's now a massive, like every plot of land has been turned into like multi-story buildings, where you like look out your window and you're like breathing on your neighbor from another tower. So there's that version of it growing. It grows like 500,000 population grows by 500,000 people coming in every year. Then you have the garment industry, which is constantly growing. You have the super rich, which is like one of the fastest, I think alongside Nigeria, fastest growing super rich in the world, building hotels, malls. And so on one hand, you have everything centralized. So all the jobs are there. So while embankments burst after cyclones and a village or a town is put underwater, they either go to their local bigger town or they go to Dhaka and they work in garment factories, or they work in they like rickshaw drive riders, or like some kind of manual day labor. So that's one way. That's one like a kind of social and human cost. Then there's a clear environmental cost of of like some of the cement and stuff built from all of this is literally is dragged from the bottom of rivers in other parts of the country. It's like they literally pull it up from the river, and that damages the rivers and redirects them, and it means like people who had jobs like ferrying people on. I've some both along the rivers, like instead of bus routes, but also just getting across it where there wasn't a bridge or something. They've lost their livelihoods. Now some of that is like there's like bridges and stuff now, and there's roads. Like when my dad was growing up, there weren't too many roads, so like they had to go by river. Like that was the main form of transport. They went to the market or whatever by river. That's not so true anymore, apart from a few areas that are underwater, like naturally underwater for parts of the year. So those rivers have gone. Obviously, fishermen don't have the same access to fish. You then also have like certain minority communities that rely specifically on certain trades, like of like animals that, or kind of insects and stuff that you get in certain parts. Or plants, they can't get access to that anymore. So a lot of rivers have died, like they're not there anymore, or they've redirected. And the other thing which one of these, like a guy who's like a river activist told me, and his interesting point is like from old Dhaka is that there's also like a cultural cost. Like people have forgotten the rivers. They'll kind of being like in like nationalist literature and stuff that kind of brags about being Bengali or whatever. They'll talk about 700 rivers or whatever. But he made the point that old Dhaka, which is like this Mughal era, there's like all these palaces, is where the city started, pretty much. Those palaces were built right on the riverbank.
Mm.
But now all the built, and they're facing the river. All the new towers that have gone up there face away from the river. So it's like culturally people have turned away, and like they don't want to be associated. So yeah, that's the tension. And they were like a source of livelihood, and they still could be, because roads are overwhelmed. Like there's constant traffic everywhere in the country. There's so much that just drives people, that makes a lot of the country unlivable, and especially Dhaka. But Dhaka is the only place they can go to, and yet the river is neglected.
Okay, thank you. Amira, so you mentioned that your piece was talking about the absurdity of borders and how we have oppressed the water into becoming this violent thing that takes lives. So can you explain to me a little bit about sort of the motivations for why this was the thing that you wanted to approach when writing this piece?
Question. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's a good question. To be honest, like maybe I should have said this when I was answering the writing journey question. I think these days when I write, it's, I guess, writing from a place of like I have to write, like, you know, like there's a sense of necessity and like trying to find a way to articulate a certain thought or make sense of something that's happening, or make sense of a memory. So this piece was like that. So it wasn't something I planned out. And in a way, I kind of more or less wrote it in like one go, but then edited it later when like I submitted it to Khidr, for example. So it was, I guess, coming from a place of rage. And I think just being on that beach, being reminded of this. I think also there was this tension between, I was not feeling particularly well that winter. And I thought, okay, I'll go to a beach because I have this thing where I need sometimes to be near a body of water. I find that soothing, and to see a horizon. This is something I felt strongly in lockdown, especially. So yeah, Brighton was just an easy option from London. So I was associating I'll see the sea, that this is going to be a soothing experience, but then quickly being reminded that this particular sea has been a host of a lot of violence. And I think also, I mean, Breached Waves, the title comes from a headline that I read in, I don't know where, which paper it was or anything, but it was probably a politician at the time talking about how 9, the language, 9 migrants breached the border. Yeah, so so then like suddenly this this beautiful place was breached somehow. So I just couldn't kind of disconnect those two things, and I think that's kind of what led to it. Does that answer your question, or would you like me to elaborate?
No, that's perfect. I mean, I'm going to pick up on things that everybody's saying, so don't feel that you have to get everything out at once, because I've read your pieces very deeply. So I'm hoping to pick up on all these little things that you guys are going to be talking about. Dina, I've got quite an interesting question for you with regards to your piece. I mean, you mentioned earlier that it's you mentioned that it's a tool. The rain summoning songs and the traditions are a tool that are used to build sovereignty. And I think this is so relevant in the context of the occupation of Palestine. So I guess my question to you is, how do you believe engaging with oral histories and traditions such as these contributes to the resistance?
I mean, I think that, documented archives that are very neatly well written are normally the process normally the result of either a colonizer that needs to know anything and everything about you, or a result of, a state building process that needs to kind of categorize and kill all of the different viable cultures that used to exist here. It's also the state building process that does this to people. So back to why oral history is so important is because it's essentially unarchivable. Like, you could make all the recordings you want, you could film them in HD, you can see all of the things that you need to see about the context, and you can write it down about all of the communities that you're recording. But to think that you can actually look at a community and put it in an archive and have that archive be an accurate reflection of what the community is doing is silly. Like, it's just not the case, right? So that's why orality was really important for me. And every time I sang the songs again, and when I still do, there's always a difference. There's always a nuance in the way that I'm singing. There's always a difference in who I'm singing with. There's always the possibility of teaching someone the new song. But the only way that it can really be taught is through singing it together, So there's that, because of the nature, the sound is like inherently ephemeral, right? Like, you have it for now, I say this word and then you can't hear it anymore, even though the Zoom is definitely being recorded. The nature of the ephemerality of sound means that to keep it around, to do it, we need to do it. Like, we do it now, and that's how we know that it's here and thriving and alive. And then we keep changing it according to us. So this gives us a huge responsibility as like culture bearers. So we're like, yeah, I mean, this is not something that's written down and I've learned it from a piece of paper. I also have the responsibility to add to it, to change it, to grow it, to fit what I see as the problem that we're facing today. Because the problem that we're facing today is not a real problem of water scarcity. It's a problem of water being stolen. So this issue of adding to the archive as a person who has that ability to do so and is invited to do so, by virtue of maybe being a culture bearer and being a Palestinian who listens to Palestinian music, I think that's quite important.
I think we might have lost Dina. No, I can hear you now.
Well, I'm happy I chose to come back to the recording with yeah, the issue of archiving, the issue of modifying the archive to fit the world that we're in. Also, I guess the issue is to challenge kind of this idea that both time and water are scarce. They're not. Like, we don't actually have like such a serious issue, considering like what the population is. It's just that someone has decided, they, who must not be named, they've decided to take the water and use it for agricultural purposes, right? So bringing it up again is a constant reminder that we are in charge of not only this pieces of land that we owe something, but also we're in charge of the narrative about those. So I think keeping it oral and keeping it in a way as like popular as possible has been just really important for me for those reasons, because it's like there's a responsibility to not make it into like my brainchild, or there's a responsibility to not make it into many pieces of master theses or whatever theses. So I felt that was relevant to be able to sing them, or to allow people to be able to sing them as well in the future.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to talk a little bit more about sort of, you know, the responsibility you feel as, you know, to like a culture bearer in a way, but also kind of giving respect to the communities as well. That kind of runs through the entirety of your research. I think is just, it's phenomenal. Hibaq, throughout your poem, water is a really dangerous entity, and there's a really deep and unforgiving nature to the way that you present water. But at the same time, you write about an equally powerful force to battle the water, and that's the idea of remembering and recalling those who've been lost. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I didn't want to leave the piece. So initially, as like some sort of background, I actually started writing this piece in particular in memory of Shukri Abdi, the young girl who was mysteriously found in water, and whose case I believe was handled really, really badly, and was a massive shock to many of us, particularly to the Somali community, who have just so many stories of loss regarding water, as people who have traveled and travel everywhere, and sometimes through the only means necessary, you know, which aren't always the safest routes or whatever that may mean. And so I did start out writing because I was thinking about that. And in doing so, I then just kind of thought, this is really, really, firstly, recent, still very much being talked about, and still something that pains me personally, you know, to write about or to read about. And so I then decided to take a step back from that, because I was like, you know, I don't know if that actually does anything for her memory. You know, I don't know if that actually does anything for people grieving who knew her personally. And so I took a step away from sort of that sort of thinking and try to generalize it, and realize it's so unfortunately and disgustingly so easily generalizable. I don't know if that's a word, but it's so easy to generalize this because it happens so often. And so the idea of loss and the idea of water, and water, like you said, being a sort of violent entity that takes from us so much, I then wanted to sort of bookend that with the idea of, okay, well, we are here, you know, and we go through all of this, and it's devastating and it's horrible, and we don't know how to process it, especially in a year like the one that we're still having but have had, and that I wanted to write about the work that community does to keep memory, and to make sure that, you know, however we're processing it, it is rooted in community. It is rooted in this idea that, okay, so and so knows what I'm going through, or this has happened here, or, you know, I can lean on these people, or ritual, you know, and the necessity of ritual in death and in grieving. And so, yeah, I definitely thought that it was important to sort of round the poem up in that sort of way. Yeah. And as a memory also to myself, that actually everything that I need to be focusing on, everything I need to be doing, needs to be with the intent and with the care that you only get from grounding yourself in a community, even if for whatever reason it may be, it's not the community that you grew with, or it's not the community that you know best, or it's not, you know, it could be your friends or it could be at work, but it is rooted in something so much bigger than just me sitting here writing this poem, you know, me sitting here talking about this issue. And actually, for me personally, the older I get, the more I find myself returning to a lot of cultural things and ritual and understanding and even religion and things like that. And so it's like taking more from it than I guess I ever expected to, because really you grow and you learn that that's all we have, you know, that's the idea of that communal sort of aspect of life is really all we have and keeps us going, as I'm sure many of you have sort of realized as well as I have in the last year, that we're nothing without the people around us. And so it felt so important to root that in something, and it felt fitting.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, I kind of want to move on to the next section, which is talking a bit about your writing styles. So I guess we'll kick off with Kaamil again. Kaamil, you said that, you know, you're primarily a reporter and writing is the output for that. So, you know, how is sort of the day-to-day journalistic writing that you do different from this, you know, the piece that you contributed to the zine in terms of like the way that it's written?
I don't know if is that different. I mean, okay, I have to type, like sometimes I'll be sometimes there's news pieces I do, but I mean, other than if I'm doing news, which is obviously kind of just quite straight, kind of get to the point of what is important here. What I mean is like that reporting is what guides everything to me. Like it's not. I don't view being a journalist as being a writer. I view it as like listening to people. So it's like, okay, the stereotypical like piece about like quite a few Arab countries or quite a few like South Asian countries is like this and this person speak. I was at a tea shop and people were talking about this. Is because to me that's you haven't been paying attention to something if that's where you start. There might be some situations where a tea shop is an important place to start because it's relevant, but most of the time it's a problem if that's the main thing you've noticed. So yeah, I see it as listening or observation, and that's where I start. Kind of my writing style is to start with what sticks out to me, what people have told me. I don't take many questions. I like very rarely prepare questions for an interview, unless it's like some big person that I need to cover a bunch of ground for. I like just it's mostly I listen. I try to feed off what people tell me, and like often I'll go somewhere and I might go with 2 story ideas, and I'll try and build up like leave with like 4 or 5. So that's my writing process is like listening. It's and then what do you take away from that? Then it kind of comes together itself usually. Just what, yeah, like it's not really writing. The writing part is just comes. I guess one of the things about the day-to-day is I can write really quickly. Like we easily put out thousands of words a day. It's about it. The part that takes time is paying attention to what's going on around, and that means learning some languages, but maybe not. You can't always learn languages for everywhere. So when it's learning other things about how people react to body language, trying to just trying to understand and like not make assumptions about stuff. And yeah, it's good to have someone to bounce that off with who you can rely on. But yeah, just my writing process is observations that guide me towards what I think is kind of makes the story, and it's the same with this one. It's kind of time spent talking to people I didn't know, and just watching and getting an idea of what the rivers mean to them, and then building that together, building that up.
Yeah, and that whole, you know, listening and observation kind of process that you go through is really reflective in the piece, because despite there only being, I think, a couple of quotes of actual people speaking, it is just an amalgamation of so many different perspectives, and really no first person kind of sentence in there at all.
Oh, so, yeah, like, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, so
I haven't written many like first person things.
But yeah, no, thank you for answering that. Amira, I found that when I was reading your piece, the use of repetition is really heavy, especially as you kind of get near the end, where it seems like your rage is just building up at how absurd everything is. You know, in terms of things, there being English waters, English sky, English sun, English birds, we think. So can you explain this stylistic choice and what you were hoping to portray with the use of heavy repetition?
Yeah, definitely. Can I just check, am I frozen or is it just my screen?
You're frozen.
Am I frozen too? But you can hear me.
Yeah,
Let me see if I turn video off and then back on, what happens. Oh, and now I can't turn it on. Okay, we'll sort that out later. So repetition. Yeah, I think like you put that quite nicely. I think it is coming from a place. Oh, sorry, I'm just trying to sort out the video. It's saying it failed to start the video camera. This has happened to me before. I might have to like leave and then come back. Should I do this and then maybe?
Yeah, sure. You can
okay.
come back, and I can ask perhaps Dina or maybe Hibaq a question as well, if that's okay. Hibaq, yeah. Okay.
I'll be right back.
Okay. So Hibaq, the movement of the poem, you know, with the stanza breaks, almost allows us as the readers to have small breaks, which isn't really granted by unruly seawater. So when writing this poem, did you intentionally write those breaks in for yourself or the readers, almost as kind of like a gentle mercy act for us, for yourself in the writing process and for us in the reading process as well?
I think, yeah, it was actually definitely more for myself in the writing process initially. The first few drafts of it, it was more block texty, and I'd been writing in that way for a little while now, and the first couple iterations of the poem were quite different as well to what I ended up submitting, and so it was very much a necessity for me, I think, when writing I had the breaks ready, but they weren't on the page in that way. And so I then realized, okay, I've done those breaks for myself, but obviously this is going to be read by somebody else, you know, just stuff that you usually should think about when writing for something to be read, which I don't always do. But I realized, okay, everybody else is going to need those breaks just as much. And so I remember actually when I sent, when Ben asked for the commission, and she was sort of telling me about it, and I was just like, okay, this is perfect, and I have a poem ready that I'd really like to send in. And then when I did submit it, I worried that I'd sent the wrong file, and I think I might have like DM'd Nishat as well, and I was just like, I think I've sent the wrong file, and I don't think the line breaks are where they're supposed to be. And usually that wouldn't matter too much to me, but with this poem, it definitely did. Yeah, I do think of it as a little mercy to myself, and hopefully it comes off that way as well when you read it, because it is too much to take in that level of, you know, the amount of loss that we speak about on a day-to-day in general, and then in this year that we've had, and then also specifically when talking about these topics and topics that Amira mentioned as well. And it became a thing of needing that pause, those breaks, to take in what I'd just written. And I was hoping that the readers would read it in that way as well, that they could sort of slowly work their way through the piece, and that it does end on a more comforting note than it started with. So it was on purpose. Amazing,
thank you so much. Dina, so I know that you are academically trained as an ethnographer. I think that's how you pronounce it. And your piece kind of showcases this tension between research objectives, you know, in an academic way, and then also this newer education of yours that you were gaining day by day, which was more encouraging you to flow. So, you know, when you're coming from an academically trained background, how do you mediate the two contrasting writing styles that were required of you on the journey to finishing this piece?
I mean, what I found really was that to make anything make sense, I just consistently had to remove academia. Just like leave the room, mate, read it. What I found was normally, I mean, the institutions that we work within, no matter how transgressive they ask themselves to be, no matter how transgressive they want to be, often just end up, you know, just being the way that they are. Mm-hmm. Which I found quite frustrating for trying to, like, for example, explain to my advisor that yeah, it's just not going to work for me to write about, for example, a larger number of people that I speak with, or interlocutors or participants, or in explaining, for example, that this can't really follow the rules of like a thick description of what was going on.
Yep.
I could write it like that, but it's also, why am I describing something that I'm kind of a part of? Like, I'm observing it. I'm not observing. I'm also here. I'm also here. So it kind of feels like what is asked of us as like a reflexive process, or as ethnographers, you know, when we're asked to be reflecting on our position in the thing, already the request assumes us to be in a specific position of kind of like some kind of power, which honestly, if you're gathering information about people, you are in a specific position of power. But I realized that it's better for me to, instead of being in a position where I'm allowing myself to describe, I'd rather be in a position where I'm allowing myself to participate. Yeah, and I do think there's something a little bit like not real about calling a thing a participant observation, right? I think I felt
it loses
I felt like a snitch. I was like just looking at people do things, and I'm gonna write it down and tell my advisor in London. But the reality of that is, I just feel like it was much more empowering for me to do the research, to continue with the research after I finished my master, to kind of unlearn a lot of that training. And it enabled me to do the thing, you know, I had an excuse, I had a deadline, I had a structure that was really useful. But a lot of what I had to do was basically to say, I'm interested in this in many several ways. So let me just go do this exploration from this angle that maybe my slightly traditional anthropology teacher would not allow, and this different angle that will allow me to write about it in the language that I've used for this article, which is completely not acceptable in a university, right? But it kept me engaged, and it kept me coming back to it with more questions, and it kept me on my toes about what next this body of information I had to tell me. Yeah. Does that answer any of the questions?
Yeah,
Have I understood the question?
Yeah, no, it did. Yeah. Amira, repetition. So yeah, just to repeat the question, the use of repetition is really heavy. You mentioned things like English water, English sky, English sun. So could you explain a little bit about sort of the stylistic choice and what you were hoping to portray with it?
Thank you, and I'm sorry about the video situation. But I'm back. Yeah, so the repetition, I think you were saying earlier that it sounded like I was angry, and I think that's definitely one thing that I was feeling, and I'm glad that it's read that way. And also, I think the words you're referring to, like sky, sun, pebbles, dogs, children.
Yeah.
Initially, like in the first half, I don't add the demonym before them because they're just sky, sun, children. But then I think once I think the piece is kind of divided into me, like arriving at this place that I view as like I was hoping that it would be like this healing site, and then the I clock that, oh wow, this is this is also where this is a violent border, and then that's when I start adding the English to everything, because if we're going to add English to water, what is it going to sound like if we add English to pebbles, English to dogs, English to migratory birds even, which is an oxymoron in itself. I guess I was also trying to highlight the absurdity for myself of that. And I think also just generally repetition. I remember what I was saying about, like, when I was younger, I used to write poetry, and I remember doing that a lot in my poems, like just repeating the same thing and like adding an adjective that would change it slightly. I think it's a style that I feel speaks to me, whatever the name of that style is, but I think it reiterates something as well, and it creates flow maybe. But yeah, definitely rage, absurdity, and like this idea of like drilling something. I'm really glad you read it as like there was rage in it. Yeah, I think also I end the piece by talking about my non-English being and the non-English percussion I could hear, and the non-English person playing the percussion, to also kind of, yeah, I think I was also just placing myself in the middle of all of this, like, what am I, where am I? And yeah, the kind of othering I experience on these English lands. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely read, like, it got more and more angry as you read. By every paragraph, you could sense the rage was building. And sort of the last few lines where you were talking about non-English things, it was almost as if you were kind of bringing yourself back to center, and as a way that, you know, these, like, it's a non-English person, the reminder that it isn't all English, that brought you a sense of calm that allowed the piece to kind of close. So that's, yeah, that was it was really interesting and fun to read. You can see me grinning like a fool. I'm like, yeah.
It's so interesting to hear your take on it, actually, because I've only like heard like that people I know like in my life have told me what they thought. So it's really interesting to hear people who don't know me very well tell me what they think. Thank you so much for sharing.
No worries, that's great. Okay, I want to kind of bring a little bit more focus onto the way that all of you kind of mix mediums in your work. So, you know, Kaamil, you're a photographer. Dina, your work is centered on music, and you have a beautiful voice. Hibaq, I mean, not only do you kind of write poetry, but you also are, you know, you're doing spoken word as well, and kind of engaging with readers and audiences that way. And Amira, you obviously, your work more broadly focuses on empowering communities, right? Through your participatory ESOL, you know, teaching, and also the work that you do for housing action groups as well. So I'm kind of gonna look at your other expertises now. So I guess with Kaamil, as a photographer, when you are choosing the photos that, you know, you want to highlight, whether it be for this piece or whether it be for any other piece that, you know, you have, could you tell me a bit about why you choose certain photos over others? And is this an emotional decision, or is it motivated by what moved you most, or is there another justification for why you decide to use that photo particularly to document this issue?
Difficult because I don't know if I call myself like a photographer in like a proper sense. I've always like hidden from the duty of like actually being the person sent to take photos. Like I don't like I feel uncomfortable with some of the decisions people have to make in the field, and some of the photos that they might have to be published. So to me, it's what accompanies. It's like the photo that enhances or accompanies the writing. And if we go like broader to multi, so I also do like audio a lot, and like so like in Jerusalem, I lived for a few years in like the old city, and so at the end I wanted to do like a documentary style podcast series, and so it was like, okay, well, I'm not gonna like wear headphones anymore when I'm in walking around, because you're not hearing things. So it's like what I said about observation, like you start to miss what's happening around you sometimes just by listening. So with that as well, it's the same concept of like, also by not having to be like a photojournalist, especially when I was doing news back then, is like not having the responsibility to look at where that most dramatic thing is. It's like, look somewhere else, or I mostly get to have a conversation with people while I was some point in taking photos. So it's it's like what, to me, the photo is like what adds to kind of the depth or emotion, or expresses something about the writing, accompanies the writing. That's what I'm looking for when I'm taking the photos. And like I use one lens. I don't have like a bunch of lenses. I use one, and it means it's like quite a, it's like it doesn't zoom, it doesn't it is one focal length. I have to get to a certain distance to take a photo, and so I feel like my choices are kind of made. It's like I said, I feel like most of what I do is like my choices. I let my choices are made when I'm outside, when I'm doing the first part, the input part. Like, so that's the same with photography, same with audio. Wherever I can, it's just to try and get people to hear or see something that maybe they couldn't, maybe it's a bit harder to express or get them to understand through writing.
Right, yeah, it's amazing. Hibaq, how do you feel performing poetry, in a spoken word format, and then having an audience or a reader read a poetry in the privacy of their own bedroom, differ in the way that the reader / listener understands what you're trying to get across? Like, is there any difference in the way that the message is relayed?
I would say so. I would say there's a big difference. Starting out when I was a lot younger, it was way more theatrical. Yeah, it was way more, and I was super nervous. I don't know how I did it, because I just don't do that anymore. But it was way more of a performance, and everything was memorized. And so I'd stand on stage and do these 3-minute pieces, 2.5-minute pieces, where I'd be essentially like a mini show in that sense. Every sort of spoken word piece is kind of like a mini show, and it was up to me to deliver it in a way that the emphasis was in the right place, and in a way that every person who listened to me everyone interprets things their own ways regardless, but that they were going home with an idea of what I was trying to say that was quite general and everybody kind of understood. And that's a lot of responsibility on stage, especially when the stories you're telling or the things you're saying are very personal, and not like in a very raw form as well, not like polished in any way back then. Not to say that I am now, but like definitely less so when I was 16. And so it was very much up to me. I felt a lot of responsibility on the stage, and people would also come up to me, and the words they would use were often quite similar, like powerful, touching, these sort of big sort of words that they often use with non-white people and like their art. And so I was getting a lot of that. The more I sort of did stuff that was to be read, or even if I didn't know whether anyone would ever read it, I'd written it so that it was something that was submitted or could have been published or whatever it may be. And it's been a really wild process figuring out how to get the same level of like emotion that I intend out to the reader, with them not having what I think is probably a very powerful tool for me, which is my literal voice, like the way that I would use my voice back then. I don't have the ability to do so now with stuff that's written down and read. So it was like, oh, are they going to understand this? Are they going to take this how I intend it? How are they going to interpret this word? Maybe I should, a lot more editing in that regard. And so I think both forms have been incredibly useful to me. I think both have helped shape what it means for me to be a writer or a poet. But the more that I write things that I think mean more and are way more, less like just sort of pushing out all my pain and more something that I've processed within myself and like a topic at hand or an observation or whatever it may be, the more that I prefer writing something that's then intended to be read, and allowing a little bit more responsibility to the reader, and also hearing back the differences in what people think. And so, yeah, there is a major difference, I think, for me personally. I don't know if it's the same for everybody else, but I do feel like those are two completely different stages, two completely different versions of myself. And also the more sort of reclusive, that word, like the more I sort of lean back into myself and become comfortable with that, and it being less of a performance, the more honest the work gets as well, and the more I think it honors what I want it to honor. So those would be the differences for me.
Yeah, definitely. Dina, so you mentioned in a couple of, I guess, kind of talks and things that you've done in the past, that the way that these songs are created, the way that you present them, as well, they're created and transmitted in a very unique way, with not only you memorizing the things that have happened in time before, but also improvising yourself and adding to the song. Sort of this is happening all in tandem with each other across time and through generations. And you refer to this piece as like a living archive, and I mean not the piece in the zine, but more the songs themselves as like a living archive as opposed to a dying repertoire. So what exactly do you mean by this, for people who may still not understand?
I mean, I guess I mentioned earlier that it's important for me to kind of, take the responsibility of not dealing with this as like something that I'm documenting. Because realistically, not a lot of people are singing rain songs anymore in an organic kind of like, let's go singing because, okay, so for context, the normal way normal, and when I say normal, I mean obstructed by lots of things, but a lot of those things are the occupation. But yeah, so previously, how something like this would take place is if the rain is late or if the rain is not coming into like April, May. And so a group of old women would kind of like gather themselves and say, we should go ask for some rain, mate. Like it's time. So, and the song would be communal. The song would be kind of like sung and taught together. And at the same time, for example, we pass by Jamila's place. We sing to Jamila. We say, hey, come join us, mate. Like we need you here in our choir of voices. So a lot of that, it was something that I wanted to hold on to. Like one of the characteristics of it is that it was not something to be recited, but something to be to instigate some kind of celebration, or to instigate some kind of feeling of we collectively are not going to have a good time if the rain doesn't come. So let's make sure that we collectively put our hearts into this. So to get that feeling, I used the voices in my performance. I took the voices of the women that I recorded and I sing with them. So to kind of make it both communal, but at the same time, well, as communal as I could make something that travels with me. But at the same time, to do this in such a way that emphasized what people were saying and to make it not entirely something that I come up with in my head, I had to add, I had to both memorize and understand that the words were not what needed to be memorized, or what needed to really truly be internalized was kind of the sentiment, the feeling, the belief. What I'd heard a lot of was when I asked people, does it work? Like they'd look at me like, are you dumb? Like, yeah, of course it works. Like we did it together. We believed in it, we can't, like, it's not something that we could lie about. So that's something that I felt like I had to internalize. But everything that came out of that sentiment that I learned from the people that I met was basically, it kind of flowed on its own just because it came from that place of belief, basically. So kind of deciding what was pre-made versus what I would do just needed to always come from a place of not making it into a spectacle. Like, this is not something that I look at, it's something that I do and I practice and I care about personally. Yeah.
Amazing. And Amira, so your work more broadly focuses on, like I mentioned, empowering communities and lived experiences, and kind of amplifying the voices of those that are affected by things like border politics and such demarcations. It seems to be really, really important to you. So I kind of wanted to ask you, why is it important for us and for yourself to include those experiences in our understanding of politics such as this?
Process the question. So you mean like why it's important to center
people, why it's important to, but the participatory ESOL teaching that you do, it's a radical way of teaching something quite, that has traditionally been taught a specific way for a long time, where, you have a teacher teaching someone a syllabus, but, with your teaching, what you do is you let the learner decide what they want to learn. So kind of, where does that kind of passion for centering people come in the work that you do more broadly? And does that like bleed into your writing? Because I would say that it does.
Thank you. It's like there's so much I want to say, but I'll try to kind of summarize. So on the also I'm like, it's really nice that it looks like you've researched the participatory ESOL side of things. So I really appreciate that. So I mean, to be honest, like the way I view participatory ESOL or ESOL is English for speakers of other languages, if anyone's not familiar with the acronym. It's, I mean, I view it actually as like, this is the only way like education should be done. So I don't view it as like a niche thing, as a way to do something, but actually that this is ideally how any education should be done. But I guess especially participatory, the approach I'm following at work is very rooted in, if you're familiar with Paulo Freire's work, like pedagogy of the oppressed. So it comes from a very kind of radical tradition around finding ways to look at education as liberation. And centering oppressed communities. So Paulo Freire's work was basically literacy with agrarian landless workers in the context of Latin America. So, and then like there's a lot of formulations of his kind of work. And one of them is in the context of the context I work in, so like working with migrant communities in the UK. So like participatory, so I view it as like this participatory education should be the way forward in general. But in terms of the like centering voices element of your question, I mean, what I do with students is through this approach, there's often action that comes out as a result of it. So, for example, I mentioned housing, and so this is something we'd be discussing in class, and then we decide, okay, we want to do something about it. So we set up a housing action group, for example, and so that's the students like taking I don't know what term I should use, but they are very involved in the action that comes out of that. In terms of how this relates to my writing, I guess, to be honest, I think at some point in the past, I had so many conversations with friends as we were thinking and reflecting on our writing and what we should be writing about. I feel like I may have reached a semi-conclusion that maybe it's best that I just focus on that I just talk about myself, because there's a lot of things to consider around, like, so I'm from a migrant background, but like I was born here. I have a British passport. I did not have to take a journey that's like the examples I'm referring to in the piece. So I feel like I can only speak from my position and that kind of like personal like style of writing. So yeah, that piece was that. And in terms of my work, because I'm given the communities I work with, it's very much intersects with migrant justice. I mean, most recently there was the new plan for, well, new plan for immigration that Priti Patel is pushing forward. It's going to be horrendous. Yeah, so these are issues I'm like constantly thinking about, but beyond my work, to be honest, but it just so happens as it's part of my work. But like this is gonna create a two-tier system for seeking asylum in the UK, where you have like this, it will solidify this idea of legal and illegal migrant or a refugee or asylum or person seeking asylum. Also basically because basically the premise of it is how you enter the UK will decide what your position is going to be, what your status is going to end up like. So this is already quite difficult, and it's going to get even more difficult with this system. So if you enter the UK, as many people do because the system just does not allow for a safer way to do it, if you enter like through the channel, then it's just going to create a very, very hostile context for you to be able to get status in this country. And I just, one last point I'll add is maybe, because I feel like maybe I was talking a little bit in the abstract when I talk about like violent borders. I feel sometimes some people ask for examples for that, what do I mean? But most, like, I wrote this piece, as I said, a couple of years ago. The situation's only got worse in terms of like the channel and how border control plays out on it. Like most recently, there was talk of having boats creating waves to basically like so people on smaller boats would capsize. There was also mention of creating like a string of boats that form a physical barrier. So it is very violent how this government and governments before this one as well have talked about border control in the channel. And also it's incredibly dehumanizing because there is no, like, going back to what you're saying about centering voices of the people like concerned, like on the issue. Like even with the new plan for immigration, there was no way it was only available, the consultation was only in English and Welsh. There was like many of my students like could not like give their opinion. There were no explicit questions asking people for their experiences. That's if we even believe in consultations, yeah. But yeah, so I just guess I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on what I mean by violent borders as well while we're at it. But
no, that's amazing. I wish we had more time to chat. I've got so many more questions that I'm sure in the future I will be badgering you all individually whenever I get a chance to hopefully meet you in person. But I guess for today, I think we should kind of end it there. And I guess like I wanted to give you guys maybe like a few brief moments to tell the audience about what you have got going on at the moment. What can we expect from you in the future, and how can we get involved if you need us to. So yeah, I mean, we can go around the room again. So Hibaq, if you want to tell us what you've got going on at the moment.
Yep, sorry, I just had to unmute myself. So right now I sort of took a little break once the book was released to just kind of recalibrate and work on some other projects outside of writing something like full text to be put somewhere. And what I realized while doing that is actually because of lockdowns and stuff, I've not actually read in as many the ways that I would usually read. And so as things start to lift, I'm hoping that my main sort of way of engaging with people who are interested is by being at readings and being booked for events and actually getting to read the book out to people. And so I'm quite excited for that and the idea of that. Going forward, like I did say earlier, I'm looking towards a lot of audio projects. I'm working on 2 at the moment that are a bit more hush-hush. So when I have more information or it's a bit more solidified, I'll be able to share that. And yeah, that's pretty much it, really, being able to push the book and sort of have some fun with it that I didn't get to have and share it a bit more widely and sort of solidify plans regarding these audio projects. And yeah, in terms of wanting to help me out, or if I ever need any advice, I am on social media. You can find me on Twitter at __ Hibaq, HIBAQ, or on Insta at HBQOSMN, which is just my name without the vowels. And those are pretty much the only 2 mediums I use, I'm not gonna lie. And my Twitter is not very professional. I'll warn everyone now, but that is where I put everything, and it's sort of where I connect with people best, I think. So yeah, look out for that stuff.
Amazing. Dina, what have you got going on at the moment that you would like to let us know about?
Hey, yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I've got quite a bit that I've planned and that I'm not going through with. So maybe find me at 2 separate performances at Hibaq.
Amazing.
But
wow.
Not super sure about that just yet. I'm still confirming. I am currently youth music resident at Cafe Otto, so look forward, please, if you want to probably a release and maybe a performance that was recorded at Cafe Otto with the guidance of Cafe Otto. And I'm also in a residency currently focusing on recording women artists that largely speak Arabic. So from several places, some of us are Yemeni, some of us are Jordanian, some of us are Palestinian, some of us are. That's happening. It's specifically geared towards experimental sound and music. We also have, I'll be performing at the next festival at the end of the year in Belgium. That will be more about, again, the performances will be geared a little bit more towards death and time. So see you guys then. If you feel like following me on social media, it's Bint, then MBAREH Mbareh, Bint Mbareh. And I'd love to see you guys there.
Saying Kaamil, anything that we should look out for?
I mean, I guess just day-to-day writing, it's mostly on the Guardian's global development list, so I don't know if I should be plugging them, but that's it really. I mean, I've got things I have idea. I'm planning to do a newsletter soon on like marginalized communities, just a way to like follow up stories and follow up with people who I don't like kind of leaving behind once I've spoken to. So you can see from my socials if I ever like make the step to actually commit to that. Hopefully soon. All my Twitter and stuff is just my name, my second name. I'm almost finished the book about Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, so I'm mean, process of getting it published, get a publisher sorted. So we'll see. I can't. I don't know how soon that's gonna be a thing. But yeah, the book's pretty much finished. That's it.
Amazing. Wow. Looking forward to that. And Amira, lastly but definitely not least.
I feel like this year has been intense and I actually can't think of anything that's coming up. I know in terms of writing, I know throughout the pandemic I've written a series of essays, like first thing in the morning. So a lot of it is reflection on like pandemic mornings type thing. And I don't know what I'm gonna do with that, but it's like very kind of memoir writing, like type of writing. Maybe that will turn into something. But generally, I think it's just been a really difficult year on so many fronts that I feel like I haven't had capacity to engage with a lot. But I will share my Twitter handle. I tend to post any updates and also just things maybe relating to some of the elements of things from work that I mentioned. And so it's AM, the first two letters of my first name, and then my surname Elwakil. So AMELWAKIL. And yeah, I think that's me on Twitter.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for joining. And I'm now going to pass it on to Nishat for just some closing remarks.
Thank you so much, everyone. That's been such a brilliant discussion, and the Khidr Collective team have been like gushing away at everything you've said in our group chat. We do have one question. This is to Dina. One of our team, Nadine, wants to know, where in Palestine did you go for the rain songs? And she wants to know where there are geographical differences to the songs. She's sort of thinking of Gaza being a place right by the sea, and do Gazans tend to have a different relationship with water?
Well, thank you, that's such a great question. Normally, culturally, largely what I notice with music is that, and it's not really my noticing this, right? Someone has written a lot about this, and if you want the book, I'm happy to send you the name of the book. It's about the difference between mountainous culture right through like south to north Palestine in the middle, and then the coastal culture, which Gaza can be included in. This includes food and dress and kind of, with loads of nuances across all of these, obviously, but like there's a noticeable divide with like stricter, kind of more melancholy, maybe like much more sullen culture in the mountains, and you notice it in the more vertical way of dancing and like, and then, you know, much more how to describe it, like, you know, a luxurious kind of indulgent, like slower with time kind of culture that is across, maybe here we call it island life, but it's like, so I don't know actually, because I have obviously not been able to travel outside of the West Bank to get any of the recordings. So most of my recordings have been throughout various villages and some around Ramallah, some in my mother's hometown in Beit Iwa, some that's near Nablus in the north of the West Bank. Some have been in the south in a refugee camp inside of Bethlehem, and some have been, and also interestingly, obviously, the ones recorded in a refugee camp were from a place where the shrine to whom the songs were directed, Zakaria, was desecrated and obviously essentially not taken care of at all. And the woman who sang this to me also described that, you know, a lot of the people that she saw when she visited the shrine were, disrespectful to the traditions that she knew around the shrine. So there are plenty of nuances. Most places, it's actually a hyper-localized tradition. When you are singing in a specific village, you're singing to the ancestors of that village, kind of the saints and their sanctuaries. So arguably there's just plenty of nuance, and a lot of it is aimed at kind of bringing the community, convincing people in a specific way to come together to sing the rain songs. So yeah, big differences. Happy to like write it out more in detail after the thing.
Oh no, that would be amazing. Thank you for going into that. And thank you to everyone. I'm looking forward to all the exciting things that you've got lined up, because the kind of the level of care that you've spoken about to the communities that you make your art for, or that you belong to, are really struck me. So I think that's really, really special. And that is all we have time for. And again, it would be amazing to talk to you for hours and hours. So thank you again to Hibaq, Dina, Kaamil and Amira. And also thank you to our wonderful host, Wartha, of course, from Khidr Collective. Just to let everyone know who's watching, this video, we're gonna make it available on our YouTube channel and on our website, khidrcollective.co.uk. Where you can also buy a copy of the Water issue featuring all of our lovely writers' work, if you haven't already done so. We'd also, there it is. We would really also love it if you could let us know what you thought of the event on Twitter and Instagram. We're at Khidr Collective, and please do #WritingWater. So thank you again. Thank you for joining us on a very warm evening. Sorry I had to keep leaving. Sorry for the technical difficulties at the start, but I hope you enjoyed it, and please stay in touch. Take care and goodbye.